October 13th, 2047. 12 Genoese trading ships spent days drifting toward the port of Messina, Sicily. From the shore, the lack of activity on deck was the first sign that something was wrong. When dock workers finally climbed aboard, they found the sailors who weren't already dead were incapacitated, covered in black, pus-filled boils that oozed blood from the groin and armpits. Fearing the death ships, Sicilian authorities hastily ordered the fleet back out to sea. It was a panicked attempt at containment, but the ships had already docked long enough for the infection to move inland. This single failure at the docks unleashed a biological crisis that would destroy the medieval world and force the survivors to build a new one in its place. Over the next 5 years, the plague would kill between 75 and 200 million people across Eurasia. In Europe, this represented a loss of 30 to 60% of the entire population. The sheer speed of the dying erased entire communities. In England alone, more than 1,000 villages were abandoned, as their populations fell below the threshold required to sustain a settlement. This manuscript illustrates the resulting breakdown of social order. As death rates spiked, the traditional rites of a Christian burial became impossible to maintain. Families were forced to stack coffins in mass pits, treating the dead as a logistical problem rather than a spiritual one. The Black Death was more than a demographic collapse. It was the physical removal of the labor and institutions that held the medieval period together. The pandemic's reach into Europe began with an act of biological warfare. During the 1346 siege of Kaffa, the Mongol army catapulted the bodies of their own plague victims over the city walls to infect the Genoese defenders. The true engine of the catastrophe was Yersinia pestis. These yellow clusters of bacteria hitched a ride on fleas, which in turn lived on the rats that occupied the merchant ships fleeing the siege. The pathogen took 3 forms. The bubonic version attacked the lymph nodes, while the pneumonic version turned the infection airborne through coughing. The septicemic form entered the blood directly, killing nearly 100% of those it touched, often within hours of the first symptom. Because the bacteria could spread through the air and move as fast as a trade ship could sail, it outpaced any traditional efforts at containment. Medieval medicine relied on the miasma theory, which blamed bad smells and corrupted air for the disease. Treatments like lancing boils or sitting between 2 large fires were useless against a bacterial infection they didn't know existed. As institutions failed, public response turned toward religious desperation. Flagellants traveled between cities, whipping themselves in public displays of penance, hoping the physical suffering would appease God and end the pestilence. This cultural trauma is captured in the Danse Macabre paintings of the era. The skeletons lead kings, bishops, and peasants to the same fate, illustrating a new and terrifying understanding that traditional hierarchies offered no protection against the plague. With the failure of religion, medicine, and government, the survivors were left in a world where the old power structures had no answers. Before the plague, serfs had no leverage. Mass death created extreme labor scarcity. The surplus of land and wealth far outweighed the surviving people. Peasants could now demand wages and mobility. Lords were forced to offer better terms, effectively dismantling the feudal system. The aristocracy attempted to regain control with the Statute of Laborers in 1351, which made it illegal for peasants to ask for higher pay. The law was widely ignored, but it marked the first time a government intervened to regulate the labor market. The modern right to negotiate a wage and choose an employer began here, as a direct consequence of the labor vacuum left by the dead. In Florence, which lost 60% of point population, the collapse of church authority led to a rediscovery of classical Greek and Roman thought. This shift toward humanism provided the intellectual foundation for the Renaissance. The plague also crippled the overland trade routes of the Silk Road. To maintain the flow of goods from the east, European powers were forced to invest in maritime technology, directly leading to the age of exploration. Public health also modernized. In 1377, Venice mandated that ships anchor in these waters for 40 days, a period known as the quarantino. This practice is the direct ancestor of the pandemic protocols used today. These shifts in science, trade, and medicine were not the result of a peaceful desire for progress. They were forced, defensive innovations born from a civilization attempting to survive its own collapse. Recent studies show that the Black Death left a permanent imprint on human DNA. Survivors passed on specific immune gene variants that provided resistance to the bacterium. Those same genes now make modern Europeans more susceptible to autoimmune diseases like Crohn's and lupus. The biological defenses that saved our ancestors from the plague continue to shape our health 7 centuries later. The Black Death forced the closure of the medieval era, clearing the ground for the economic and scientific systems of the modern world. Ultimately, history shows us that the structures of our lives were not built by choice, but by the survivors of a world that had suddenly ceased to exist.